Rick Revel, Mr. History, brought to you in part by Dixie Gun Works in Union City, Tennessee. On this episode of History Highway, we're headed over to Marion, Arkansas to the Sultana Disaster Museum. For most Civil War buffs, this story is captivating and horrendous at the same time. For the vast majority of the population, though, this piece of history has been lost, and the stories of this tragedy must be told. Some say that Pearl Harbor was the greatest maritime disaster of all time in American history. But what if I was to tell you that during the Civil War, or what I like to call the War of Northern Aggression, it was possibly the greatest maritime disaster of all? It's when the Sultana exploded and killed hundreds of men. One, two, three. We're gonna drive in every day, and somewhere along the way, there's a road sign with a story from the past. History is everywhere, and I'm gonna take you there. So buckle up tight, we're going there real fast. So take a ride down the history highway. We're headed right to the days of old. So take a ride down the history highway. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting this Chevy roll. It doesn't matter if you're a reenactor who loves the smell of black powder in the morning on the battlefield, or a collector who admires the craftsmanship of a well-made weapon of old. Dixie Gun Works has a Pedersoli just for you. And not only does Dixie Gun Works have a warehouse full of Pedersoli reproduction firearms, they have an incredible collection of antique firearms. Inside the pages of their huge catalog, you will find gun parts, shooting accessories, reenactor clothing, camping supplies, and even some big guns if you like to burn a lot of powder. Dixie Gun Works is located in Union City, Tennessee. But for your convenience, visit our online store at www.dixiegunworks.com or call 1-800-238-6785.
The Sultana is a story of needless tragedy and the greed and corruption that led to it. But it's also a story of bravery and sacrifice. The Sultana is the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, yet it's probably a story you've not been told.
The Sultana was a Mississippi steamboat that had a charter by the federal government to bring home Union prisoners of war, and the government was paying the captain per soldier. The legal capacity of the Sultana was 376 people.
At Vicksburg, through a chain of bribes, the captain had almost 2,000 recently released Union soldiers squeezed onto the boat.
Most of them were starving and weak from months of being wasted in Confederate prisons. Among those on board was one John Clark Ely, a volunteer from Ohio.
John Clark Ely was captured near Nashville on December 5th, 1864. And on Christmas Day, as he was being taken towards Andersonville, he wrote in his diary, "Will another Christmas find us among family and friends again?" John Clark Ely and 2,000 of his comrades were placed on the Sultana, which he described as a large but not very fine steamboat.
The Sultana left the wharf at Vicksburg and headed upstream. At Helena, it docked to pick up a few passengers, and here photographer Thomas W. Banks showed us what the Sultana looked like as she made her way upriver.
John Clark Ely wrote in his diary that day, Oh, a very fine day, upward still we go. The Sultana docked at Memphis at 6 p.m. and stayed there until midnight, and then steamed northward on the flooded Mississippi River.
When the Sultana was about 7 miles north of Memphis, at 2 in the morning on April 27, 1865, her boilers exploded.
Hundreds of men were killed instantly by the superheated steam, the shrapnel from the exploding boilers, and within a few minutes, the entire superstructure was on fire.
Initially, there was a mad rush to get off the boat, but once these guys on the bow realized that the flames are going to the rear, they sort of stopped. But then what happens is one of the paddle wheel housing will burn away, and it starts to turn the boat. When the boat turns, the flames are now blown towards them. And now you have a second mad panic off of the bow. And this is where you have a second mass drowning of guys grabbing each other, and almost hundreds going down at one time.
When the sun rose that morning, over 1,200 people were dead or dying.
As a point of reference, the USS Arizona, when it was attacked on December 7th, 1941 by the Japanese, lost about 1,200 men also. Everybody remembers Pearl Harbor and remembers the Arizona, but how many remember the Sultana?
John Clark Ely never made it home. Along with the hundreds of men that were recovered, lie buried in graves that simply state, unknown U.S. soldier. The men on the Sultana are men that deserve to be recognized, to be remembered by a country that they fought to preserve.
Our project is to create a permanent Sultana Disaster Museum that's worthy of the significance of this event, because we believe this story needs to be told now more than ever.
We really need a Sultana Disaster Museum to remember the Sultana disaster. The men, the women, the children, the crew.
I had a relative that was on board who was the president of the Survivors Association. I didn't know about it. I knew of Andersonville, but not the Sultana. We can't lose that history.
In the little bitty museum that we've had visitors from all 50 states and 14 foreign countries. We know that with a large museum built to national standards, about 50,000 visitors would visit the museum every year.
We want them to get lunch, dinner, cup of coffee. We want them to shop, and that money gets spent in our community and stays in our community. And we feel that there will be 140 jobs that will be created either directly or indirectly by the museum. The Sultana Historical Disaster Museum is forecasted to open at the end of 2023. The cost of renovation and exhibit construction is just under $10 million. Our capital campaign is $14 million. That additional $4 million above the renovation will be used for advertising and promotion, a signature film, as well as an endowment for operating expenses while the museum grows in popularity. As economic development, this can be equal to a car manufacturing plant or a steel mill, but the bottom line is there will be money that comes into our community that's not here now. There will be people that will be coming into our community that are not here now, and our people that live here will benefit from that.
This is the best project for this region right now. So the state has to be a part of this. We've got to put money to it. We're going to benefit from it. We're going to be the biggest beneficiary of this project.
The City of Helena, West Helena, and I personally are committed to helping raise the money for this group. I think we owe it to the victims and their families who were denied a monument. I think we owe it to the survivors who were denied a pension. I think we owe it to ourselves today to remind us of where we once were in our country and where we could be again.
We study our history to learn from our past and not repeat its mistakes. But we've not told this story the way it deserves to be told. This is our opportunity, our chance to change that, and we need your help. We need your help to everyone.
From the pens of the Kennedy twins comes a new literary composition. The renowned authors of The South Was Right and a dozen more publications have become known for their zeal for conservatism and Southern heritage preservation. In their new book, Jefferson Davis, High Road to Emancipation and Constitutional Government, Donnie and Ron Kennedy hold nothing back. They're quick to point out Davis's high road approach to emancipation, while Lincoln chose the low road. Never afraid of controversy and to go against the grain of the politically correct, the Kennedy twins expose how our constitutional republic of sovereign states has been transformed into a deep state of federal government. To get your copy of the book that defends President Davis and the South, go to www.kennedytwins.com. That's www.kennedytwins.com.
Many years ago, Discovery Park of America was nothing more than a dream for Robert and Jenny Kirkland. Located in Union City, Tennessee, this world-class museum and learning center is second to none. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher planning a class trip, a parent looking for a vacation stop, or an individual who loves history and science, Discovery Park of America is the place for you. From days gone by to the future and beyond, there is something for everyone, no matter your age or point of interest. Since the year 2013, well over 1.3 million visitors have visited our 50-acre, $100 million facility. What used to be a peaceful cornfield in the countryside is now a state-of-the-art destination for you and your family. For more information, go to www.discoveryparkofamerica.com.
I'm here today at the Sultana Museum. It's called the Disaster Museum in Marion, Arkansas, with Miss Nancy Huff. She is going to kind of give us a little information that we didn't get in the video earlier. I understand that in the rescue mission that we had an interesting story about an ex-Confederate actually helping some Union soldiers
Absolutely.
that were about to drown. Could you share that with us?
Well, of course, the boat drifted until it went aground and it landed on the Arkansas side. Franklin Hardin Barton was a Confederate officer, and he actually rescued people from the river in his boat. He was still dressed in his Confederate uniform, rescuing Union soldiers, brought them to the Arkansas side.
That's good.
Some of the other people that helped with rescue was John Fogelman and his two sons, Leroy and Dallas. They were owned property at Fogelman's Landing.
Right.
And Leroy and Dallas and their father John strapped together some logs to make a raft and rowed toward the bow of the boat to help rescue people. But they wouldn't go very close to the boat, because if everybody tried to get on the raft at the same time, they would all drown.
Right.
So they called out to the people that were standing on the bow and told them that they would take a few at a time as long as they were in an organized manner. So some of the men on the bow of the boat agreed to organize, and they took group after group at 5 or 6 at a time to the tree line. The trees were submerged on the Arkansas side. The trunks of the trees were under the water. The tops of the trees are above water.
Gotcha.
So they dropped them off at the tree line so that they could hold onto the trees until they went back and got another group.
Wow. So they were determined to save as many as they could.
As many as they possibly could.
And then later, the Bostonia number 2, it came down and picked up a few.
Yeah, about an hour after the accident. The first boat that came down river to notice that the accident had happened was the Bostonia 2. And they slowed down long enough to pick as many people from the river as they possibly could, but they realized that there were so many people that it would be impossible for them to get them all. So that they continued down river to Memphis to notify people that the accident had happened and send additional people to the rescue efforts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're going to go in another room, and you got some interesting stories to tell about some of the survivors and the way they survived.
Absolutely.
All right, let's head that way. Miss Nancy, now you were talking about earlier, you mentioned something about an alligator. There was an alligator on the Sultana?
On board this boat. And of course, with 3 out of the 4 boilers exploding, everyone knew that they had to get in the water in order to save their lives.
Right.
Well, a lot of them, after they got in the water, remembered this alligator, were concerned that they were in the water with a live alligator. Right. But they shouldn't have worried too much, because Private William Luganville was one of the survivors. In his story about how he survived,
Right.
he tells that he killed the alligator by stabbing it with his knife or his bayonet through the crate.
Right.
And then he used the alligator's crate as his flotation device. So that's what saved his life.
Wow.
And then out of the wood, he built this curio box and carved on it, William Luganville, saved by alligator.
So that's his memento.
That's his memento.
Is there any other wood that survived?
Well, as far as I know, there would be very little wood that would have survived, because the entire boat burned down to the water.
Top down.
Down to the water level, and then the hull sank. So the only wood that would have survived the accident would have been anything that people used as a flotation device, such as the alligator's crate. And then this little block of wood came from a piece of wood that a gentleman had used as his flotation device. He was a furniture maker.
Wow.
So he made a plaque out of it, and so we have that. But there's very few items that would have been wood that survived the accident.
Wow. Now, I think in another room we have an actual model of the Sultana.
We do. And it actually is a very good model, as a matter of fact.
We'll go see it. Now, the theory was, you was telling me the interesting theory of what they originally thought may have caused the explosion.
Well, absolutely. They thought that the original theory causing the accident, they thought was a coal torpedo, which of course did happen during the Civil War.
It happened quite often. To explain for those that don't understand a coal torpedo, of course all my Civil War buffs are going to just say, yeah, I know what they do. But there's going to be some of the smaller ones that don't. But a coal torpedo, it was kind of a bit of espionage. It was because the Confederates were so outnumbered on the river systems, they tried to come up with creative ways to take out the gunboats, because a lot of times you couldn't penetrate the thick skin of that ironclad, so they tried to figure out a way to do it. So the coal torpedo, basically gunpowder, could be in a metal sleeve, sometime a wood sleeve, but it's covered up with coal dust, thrown into the coal pile. While they're shoveling the coal in, it would heat up, explode, and cause the boiler to explode. So that was the original theory.
That was the original theory. But the summer of 1865, after the Mississippi River went back in its banks, they came out and did a salvage expedition. And during that salvage expedition, they more or less disproved the coal torpedo theory. Because had it been a coal torpedo, of course, the explosion would have happened in all directions at the same time, and it would have blown a hole in the bottom of the boat. But they found out that the hull of the boat was left intact. The entire boat burned down to the water level, and then the hull sank, but the hull was intact.
There is a place, nestled in the rolling farmland of southern Middle Tennessee. A home constructed in 1837, nearly lost to the ravages of war. Saved by a servant and a Confederate general. A place where families loved and lost. If walls could talk, what stories could be told? If a place, a home, can feel love, loss, pain, surely this is one of those places. Nearby is a more recent structure, and inside are the stories of heroes and heroines, stories of battles won and lost, stories of sacrifices made by the people of its native soil. A place that will tell the true and complete story of the Southland and the war fought for its freedom. From the causes that led to the conflict to the modern-day struggles to protect Southern history. Historic Elm Springs and the Confederate Museum at Elm Springs are the general headquarters for the Sons of Confederate Veterans. a place where the story of the Southland and its historic struggle is preserved and told. Come and discover your history.
Hi, I'm Rick Revel, and I'm here today at the Jesse James Riding Stables, home of the Outlaw Cave, the hideout of Jesse James. Legend has it that Jesse and his gang hid out in this cave after robbing a stagecoach at Mammoth Cave. If you would like to visit his hideout and ride a horse over the trails where the Outlaws rode, come to the Jesse James Riding Stable at 3057 Mammoth Cave Road, Cave City, Kentucky. See you there. The overcrowding, there was nothing uncommon to put 1,500 troops, usually like a regiment, to put a regiment on a boat. But this is kind of putting it over the top in terms of limit. Now, as far as the weight, it could carry a lot of weight, but we have a top-heavy situation here.
Which is the problem. The boat wasn't overloaded weight-wise. It could have carried a lot more tonnage had it been carrying it in the form of cargo.
Down here,
in
lower.
the hull of the boat. And that would have, of course, provided ballast to help steady the boat in the water. The problem was that the weight was on the top of the boat, causing it to be top-heavy, which would have caused it to rock back and forth in the water considerably.
Now, let's get down to the gentleman. I want to know about the...
Well, the officer who made the decision that they could all go on one boat made his decision based on what his underling officers had told him. And he thought that the maximum number of prisoners, Union soldiers, would be 1,500. And that was something that you mentioned that they would transport quite a few troops at a time. What happened is they miscounted. They decided instead of creating the rolls as the military normally would do, they decided that they would count them in as they got on the train in Camp Fisk and then at the wharf in Vicksburg. Well, they miscounted. There were 3 trainloads of men, and they counted the first trainload and the third trainload, but they completely missed the second trainload. And so there was an entire trainload of men that weren't counted, and nobody knew about it until after the accident happened. Wow. So after the fact, they learned that there were a lot more men on the boat, upwards of the 1,500 that they had originally anticipated.
Now, financially, though, it meant a little bit to a certain gentleman by the name of Hatch.
Well, the captain, of course, his boat was one of the boats that was in the steamboat line that had the contract with the military in order to transport troops. And he knew it was coming to the end of the war. So he knew that part of his income was about to go away. He knew that he had the expenses from the repair of the boiler. And so he wanted as many men on his boat as he could possibly get. Yeah. And so he offered a bribe. And it's my understanding that several people were involved in the in that
up the chain of command, probably.
Little kickback. Everybody wanted their little piece of the pie. And so, but now, in my personal theory, and I believe that is the theory that has been the most common and has been researched enough that everybody pretty much believes that this is what happened. Reuben Hatch was the quartermaster in Vicksburg. And of course, the quartermaster is the person in the military that's responsible for purchasing supplies. So it was his job to decide what boat they went on. He was in Cairo, Illinois as an assistant quartermaster. And he was under investigation. The military was investigating him for court-martial because of allegations with regard to similar activity. But as it happens, his brother Ozias Hatch was a government official in Illinois who happened to be a close personal friend of President Lincoln's and a financial supporter of President Lincoln's presidential campaign.
Kind of handy.
Yeah. And so when Reuben was under investigation in Cairo, he had written a letter to his brother Ozias. Ozias wrote a letter to President Lincoln, and President appointed a 3-man team to investigate for that particular court-martial. Well, mysteriously, that court-martial went away.
Interesting.
Between the time he was in Cairo, Illinois, and the time he got to Vicksburg, the military sent him to New Orleans to test him to see how qualified he was to complete the duties of the quartermaster's job, which he'd been doing for 3 years. When their report came out, they recommended that they get him out of the military. At the very least, get him out of the quartermaster's job because he was totally unqualified to do the job. There was only one gentleman who made a lower score than Reuben Hatch. But because the news traveled so slowly back in that point in time in history, it was just 10 days after that report came out that they actually promoted him to chief quartermaster. So he was chief quartermaster by the time the accident actually happened. And there were two other boats that were in the Vicksburg harbor at the same time as the Sultana, the Pauline Carroll and the Lady Gay. They left the harbor basically empty. One of them had 17 passengers and the other one had no passengers whatsoever. But Reuben Hatch had gone to his superior officer and accused one of those other captains of bribery.
Oh my.
They hadn't had a chance to research, to investigate that allegation. But because of the allegation, the superior officer refused to let anybody get on that particular boat. So that's the reason one of the boats left empty.
Wow.
And then immediately after this accident happened, Reuben Hatch left the military. So they couldn't court-martial him because he was no longer under military control. But at that point, he even refused to comply with several subpoenas. They subpoenaed him a number of times, trying to get him to come back and testify to the court-martial that did happen. They couldn't even get him to comply to the subpoenas.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. So when he left the military, like I say, immediately after this accident happened, he left the military. When he left the Vicksburg, he took the funds of the quartermaster's office with him. And the boat that he was on was robbed. That boat's safe was robbed. Well, they eventually caught the thief and recovered everything that was stolen, except for about $5,500 of the money that Reuben Hatch was to have on board the boat. Well, Reuben was going into a business venture, and I think his buy-in for that business venture was $5,000 or approximately that.
Ms. Nancy, I sure appreciate you being the kind host that you are and telling us about the Sultana.
Well, I certainly appreciate your interest in the story.
Well,
We're glad to get the story out. That's why the museum was created in the first place.
Yeah.
We'll be in a new museum, hopefully.
Really?
By this time next year.
Very good.
Where it's just about a block from where we are now, so it'll be easier to find, actually.
Very good. Well, thank you once again.
Thank you.
And join us again here for our next episode of History Highway.
My crew keeps me on the road from episode to episode, 'cause they all know I got a million stories to tell. I'm no dinosaur, it's cool to explore what makes a country great and put the crack in the Liberty Bell. So take a ride down the history highway. We're headed back to the days of old. So take a ride down the history highway. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting this Chevy roll. I got the pedal to the metal and I'm letting this Chevy